Okay, so we're diving deep into the story of Abraham, Genesis 18 specifically. Buckle up because this chapter is, it's intense. We're talking about Abraham, the patriarch of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, just hanging out at his tent. And suddenly, 3 mysterious visitors show up.
Yeah, it's one of those encounters. It leaves you with so many questions. You got promises, laughter, a little bit of giant deception, this whole debate about justice and mercy. And right there in the middle of it all is Abraham, trying to figure out, how do you even bargain with God?
Right, like, what do you even say to that? It's not your average Tuesday afternoon, so picture this. Abraham's just chilling by his tent, maybe trying to catch a break from the heat, and boom, these 3 guys appear, out of nowhere. Now, the text doesn't immediately tell us who they are, but Abraham, being the incredibly hospitable guy that he is, he jumps up to welcome them, washes their feet, offers food and drink, the whole 9 yards.
That's actually a really important detail. Back then, hospitality, it wasn't just about being polite. It was like a sacred duty, especially for someone like Abraham, someone so devoted to God. You know, those actions, the washing, the offering, they were signs of his piety, almost like a ritual.
Yeah, like, welcome to my humble abode, and hey, I respect you enough to do all this stuff, to show my devotion. But little does he know, things are about to get a whole lot more divine. They're enjoying this little impromptu feast when one of the visitors drops a bomb. Sarah, Abraham's wife, is gonna have a son.
Huge news, right? We're talking about Sarah, who is way past childbearing age. I mean, this promise isn't just a blessing, it's a miracle. It's massive, not just for them, but for all 3 Abrahamic faiths. This son, Isaac, he'll become like the central figure, the fulfillment of God's covenant with Abraham.
Can you imagine just overhearing that? You've spent years thinking, okay, a family is just not happening. And then suddenly, divine intervention says otherwise. That's exactly what happens to Sarah. She's inside the tent, overhears this whole thing, and bursts out laughing. I mean, I think we've all been there. Even today, it's hard to wrap your head around. Miracles, right?
Oh, totally. And back then, being childless, especially as a woman, there was so much stigma. It was like a mark against you. It really impacted your status, your whole legacy. So Sarah's laughter, it's more than just disbelief. It's probably years of societal pressure, maybe bitterness, maybe even fear. Like, what does this even mean for me?
Yeah, it's a very human reaction. Who hasn't felt that mix of, wait, really? And oh no, what now? When something impossible seems to be happening. But then things take a turn. Sarah gets confronted about her laughter, and she denies it. A little white lie. What do you make of that?
Well, maybe she's just trying to be respectful. Especially if she's starting to think, maybe these visitors aren't just ordinary guys. There are definitely some hints in the text about their divine nature. But also, I think it shows the pressure she's under. She's already dealing with so much. And now this incredible promise. It's a lot.
She's totally caught in the middle, this incredible promise, and years of people telling her it's impossible. But then the story takes a turn. And honestly, it's kind of dark.
You're talking about Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah. Talk about whiplash. 1 minute we're talking baby blessings. The next minute, God's about to obliterate these cities because of their wickedness. And honestly, the way Sodom and Gomorrah are portrayed, it's like nobody would be surprised if they just disappeared.
Right. They've become like the ultimate symbols of sin and depravity, even outside of religion, their destruction. It's a warning, like a cautionary tale about what happens when society turns away from God.
You'd think everyone would just be like, well, they had it coming, but not Abraham. He's not just sitting there passively, accepting this divine decree. He questions God.
I love that about Abraham. He's not just blindly following orders. He's engaging with God, really wrestling with this idea of justice and mercy. And it's not just theoretical for him. He's putting himself out there, advocating for the people in these cities, even the ones who are considered wicked.
He doesn't just question, he starts bargaining. Like, okay, what if there are 50 righteous people? Will you spare it then? And then 45, then 40. He's like this master negotiator, pushing back against this idea of collective punishment. It takes guts to bargain with God.
Seriously. And his persistence, it raises all sorts of questions. Is God's justice absolute? Or is there room for negotiation, for mercy to soften the blow? Abraham seems to think maybe God is open to persuasion.
And the thing is, it seems like he is. They eventually settle on this agreement. If even 10 righteous people can be found in Sodom, God will spare the whole city, the power of 10. A little sliver of hope in this bleak situation.
It's powerful, this idea that even a small number of good people can make a huge difference. Good can outweigh evil, even in a place like Sodom.
Makes you wonder, though. What if Abraham had kept pushing? Could he have gotten that number even lower? Where's the line between justice and mercy? What does it say about one person? Standing up and challenging things, even divine decrees.
It's a question people have been debating for centuries.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Genesis 18 doesn't really give us a clear answer. The chapter ends with the visitors leaving, and Abraham's left there thinking about everything. We're left wondering, were there even 10 righteous people in Sodom? Did Abraham's bargain work?
It's like the text is leaving us hanging, forcing us to think about these questions, about justice, mercy, individual righteousness. Yeah, it's like we're right there with Abraham, trying to figure out what we would do. How far would we go? Would we have the guts to question God like that? To actually bargain over the fate of a whole city?
It's a powerful reminder, Faith, it's not just about blind obedience. It's about wrestling with these tough questions, engaging in dialogue, even with the divine. And sometimes that means pushing back, challenging the status quo, even when it feels uncomfortable.
Speaking of uncomfortable, can we go back to Sarah for a second? Her reaction to the whole son thing, that burst of laughter. It's easy to just say, oh, she didn't believe it, but I think there's more to it.
Oh, absolutely. We talked about the societal pressures, the stigma of being childless. But it goes even deeper than that. Imagine carrying that burden for years. The weight of everyone's expectations, the constant questions, feeling like you're somehow flawed, incomplete.
It's like your whole identity is tied to this one thing, this thing you can't control, and then bam, you're told it's all going to change. It's not just a shock. It's like your whole world is flipped upside down. No wonder she left.
Right. It makes total sense. Her mind is probably racing, trying to make sense of this impossible promise. Years of believing one thing. And then this.
It reminds me that even when miracles happen, we still bring our own baggage, our doubts, our fears, and those things don't just magically disappear.
Exactly. And I think Sarah's story speaks to a lot of us. We might not be waiting for a miracle baby, but we've all had those moments where everything we thought we knew is challenged. We have to deal with the unexpected, reevaluate everything.
So on the one hand, we've got this huge story, divine intervention, the fate of cities. But on the other hand, it's this very personal story. This woman struggling with her own doubts and fears, trying to make sense of this huge change. And it's all woven together in this one chapter.
That's what makes Genesis 18 so fascinating, this interplay of the personal and the cosmic, human and divine.
And all these theological and ethical questions. We've talked about God's justice, judgment versus mercy, but what about those visitors? They seem like ordinary guys at first, but then there are all these hints, like there's something more.
It's one of the most intriguing parts of the story. The text is so ambiguous, you can interpret it in so many ways. Are they angels, divine messengers? Is it God himself? Or something else entirely?
It's like a riddle wrapped in a mystery. So what are some of the theories?
Well, one common interpretation is that they're angels, spiritual beings, acting as intermediaries between God and humans. There are other parts of the Bible where angels appear in human form, delivering messages, carrying out God's will.
That makes sense. But then they're also referred to as the Lord, which seems like more than just messenger.
Exactly. And that's where the idea of theophany comes in, basically. God manifesting in a visible form to interact with humans directly.
Hold on, so you're saying God might be one of these visitors in disguise? That's kind of freaky. Imagine just sitting down at dinner, not knowing you're with the Almighty.
It definitely changes things. And it makes you wonder, did Abraham even realize? The text doesn't give us a clear answer. But there are times when he seems to sense that they're not just ordinary guys.
Like when?
Well, for instance, when one of them promises Sarah a son, Abraham doesn't question it, he doesn't ask for proof, he just accepts it. Almost like he recognizes their authority.
Yeah, you're right. It's like he knows something extraordinary is happening.
It's a good reminder that faith often means dealing with uncertainty, trusting in something beyond our understanding.
So we've got Abraham, chosen by God, wrestling with these huge questions about justice, mercy, the divine, and at the center of it all, these mysterious visitors, angels, God, something else.
It's a story that challenges us to think beyond the literal, to embrace the mystery, the ambiguity of faith.
And let's not forget the message of hope, the promise of a son, the possibility of redemption for Sodom, this belief that even against all odds, good can win out.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, even when we feel lost, there's always a reason to believe, a spark of hope to guide us.
This story, it's like peeling back layers of an onion. Every time you think you've got it figured out, another question pops up. It's one of those texts you can read again and again and still find something new.
Absolutely. That's what makes these stories so interesting. They work on so many different levels, deep spiritual truths, and then also they reflect the human experience.
So we've got this mystery about the visitors, the promise of a son, this whole debate about justice and mercy. But I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about Abraham sensing who these visitors really were. Is there anything in the text itself that supports that?
Well, there are a few key moments. For example, when the visitors first arrive, Abraham bows down to them. Bowing was a common way to show respect, but it was also used in worship.
So it could be seen as a sign of reverence, like he's acknowledging their divine status.
Exactly. And then there's the way he addresses them. He uses the plural form of Lord, which could be a way of acknowledging their collective authority, or even hinting at the idea of a triune God.
Interesting. It's like he's picking up on these subtle clues, these hints of something more.
And it raises the question, even if Abraham didn't fully understand who they were, did it really matter? His actions, his hospitality, his willingness to engage with them, it all came from a place of deep faith and reverence.
That's true. His faith went beyond needing to know for sure. He acted with compassion and integrity, whether he was dealing with men, angels, or God himself.
And that's a powerful message for us. We might not always have the answers. We might struggle with doubt. But in the end, it's our actions, our choices that define our faith.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. The promise of a son, Sodom and Gomorrah, the mystery of who these visitors really were. What's the one thing you hope people take away from this deep dive into Genesis 18?
For me, it's that. Even after all this time, these ancient stories, they still speak to us. They make us think about our own beliefs, about justice and mercy, the power of faith, and what it means to be human.
It's a story that invites us to keep asking questions, to keep searching for meaning, and to keep the conversation going, even with God.
That's it. And remember, the conversation doesn't end here. This is just one chapter in a much bigger story, a story that continues throughout history and in our own lives.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Genesis 18. We hope you found it insightful, thought-provoking, maybe even a little bit challenging. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep searching for those hidden gems of wisdom. Until next time.
Happy exploring.